People don't usually expect dignity to be controversial, but that night it was. When Letitia James walked into Maple Creek Diner, nobody reached for their phone. Nobody shouted. The confrontation wasn't loud. It was quiet, deliberate, and undeniably racial. The open sign blinked a tired red against the windows still wet from the afternoon rain. Inside, the smell of fried potatoes and cheap coffee curled through the air, country music low in the background. 6 tables were full, mostly older white diners finishing their meatloaf and hash. Letitia's entrance wasn't grand, just a tired woman in a navy pantsuit stepping in from the cold. But the room stiffened. The bell above the door jingled like always. She looked around, offered a polite nod, and walked to a booth by the window. She hadn't eaten all day. Her heels clicked lightly on the linoleum. Her expression was neutral. Exhausted, maybe, but composed. The kind of composed that makes some people nervous. A waitress, young, white, curly ponytail, smiled and called out, "Sit anywhere you like." Her name tag read, Talia. Letitia slid into the booth, picked up the plastic menu, and tried to focus on the food. The daily special was meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Simple, familiar. Her grandmother used to make it, back when meals weren't political. Talia approached with a glass of water and a notepad. "Welcome to Maple Creek. Can I start you with some coffee?" "That would be great, thank you," Letitia replied. Her voice was warm, almost too polite. She'd been in rooms far colder. But before the coffee arrived, trouble surfaced from the kitchen. A woman in a flower-streaked apron stepped out, face flushed, jaw tight. Her name, Melissa, was stitched across her chest in blue thread. She locked eyes with Letitia, then turned sharply toward Talia. "Come here a minute." Talia hesitated, glanced toward the booth, and obeyed. The 2 women whispered near the register. Talia's posture shifted. Her eyes widened. She looked back at Letitia with something between panic and pity. Melissa's voice was low but urgent. Then she straightened her apron, squared her shoulders, and walked to the booth. Talia trailed behind like a shadow. "I'm sorry," Melissa said, arms crossed, "but I can't serve you here." Letitia looked up, confused but calm. "Excuse me?" "I know who you are, Miss James. I don't agree with your politics, and frankly, I don't feel comfortable." Her voice was sharp, but it wavered. "This is my business, and I have the right to decide who I serve." Silence swept the room. A fork clinked against a plate. The man at the counter turned halfway in his stool. Letitia blinked once. "You're refusing to serve me because of my politics?" Melissa didn't flinch. "I'm refusing because I don't want a scene in here." Letitia glanced around. "Seems I'm not the one causing one." Her voice was steady, but her eyes were steel. Talia looked like she wanted the floor to open and swallow her whole. Letitia exhaled slowly. The temptation to respond, to list her legal rights, to remind Melissa of public accommodation laws, it all flickered through her mind. But she said none of it. "I understand," she said softly. She closed the menu and set it neatly back in its holder. "It's your business, your choice." Melissa was ready for a fight. She wasn't ready for grace. "Thank you for your honesty," Letitia added, standing. "Have a good evening." She walked to the door. Every eye followed her. Nobody spoke. The bell jingled as she stepped out into the night. In her car, she sat with both hands on the steering wheel. Her stomach still ached from hunger, but what pressed on her chest was heavier. She'd seen this before. Not always this overt, but familiar enough. Through the window, she saw Melissa gesturing to her diners, trying to explain away what had just happened. Talia stood frozen by the coffee pot, eyes fixed on the floor. Letitia opened her phone and scrolled until she found the contact she wanted. She tapped call. "Hey, it's Letitia. Remember that fund you mentioned? I think I found your next project." She glanced once more at the diner, its golden light glowing warm against the darkness outside. "Yeah, trust me," she said quietly. "This is going to shake some things up." She hung up, started the engine, and pulled away, Johnny Cash humming through the radio like nothing had happened. But something had, and the town had no idea what was coming next. Melissa Hargrove had a lot to say about government overreach, unless, of course, she was the one doing the overreaching. Her arms still crossed like a gate, she stood near the register after turning away a black woman who simply wanted dinner. "My parents lost their farm because of policies she supports," she declared, as if that were an airtight argument for selective segregation. "I can't serve someone like that and feel right about it." Which was odd, considering she'd served men who'd screamed at their wives and tipped in pocket lint. But ideology, especially when worn as armor, has a funny way of masking hypocrisy in lace and patriotism. Talia nodded, not because she agreed, but because silence was safer than confrontation. The diner door jingled. A white family of 4 walked in, all smiles and wind-chapped cheeks. Melissa spun on cue. Her customer service smile snapped into place like a badge. Hypocrisy makes for excellent posture. For the rest of the shift, Talia took orders and refilled coffee, but the image of Letitia James being quietly exiled kept crashing into her thoughts. Letitia hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't pulled out her phone to record. She hadn't delivered a lecture. She'd just looked sad. Not performative sadness, the kind certain politicians weaponize, but quiet, layered grief. The kind you carry when you've been here before, too many times, in too many places that hang signs saying open but mean not for you. As she wiped down the last table, Talia wondered what Letitia had done after walking out. Maybe found a diner that didn't vet customers based on Fox News talking points. Maybe she'd gone online and told her 2 million followers that Melissa's hash browns weren't worth the hostility. Or maybe, just maybe, she'd done something smarter. Talia didn't know it then, but Melissa's little protest diner was about to get a spotlight hotter than a deep fryer on Sunday brunch. Her legs ached by the time she reached the 3rd-floor landing of her building. The elevator was still broken, a fact the landlord blamed on supply chain issues, which, translated, meant, "I don't care and you can't sue me." The hallway reeked of overcooked microwave dinners and someone's failed attempt at bacon. She turned her key slowly, careful not to wake her grandmother, but the soft click of a lamp betrayed her. "You're late," Eliza Reynolds said from her worn blue armchair, glasses dangling from a chain, blanket tucked around her legs like a throne of quiet judgment. "Sorry, Grandma. Melissa asked me to stay and help with inventory." Talia dropped her bag. "Why are you still up? Did you take your medicine?" Eliza waved her off. "I'm not 8. Come sit. You look like someone who just watched a dog get kicked." Talia did sit, and it spilled out. The awkward silence at the diner. The moment Letitia was asked to leave. The stiffness in Melissa's voice. The sad dignity in Letitia's exit. "She just left," Talia said. "Didn't argue, didn't even frown. Just folded her menu and walked out like she's done it before." Eliza frowned. "And Melissa thought that was acceptable?" "She says her parents lost their farm because of policies Letitia supports." "Ah, yes," Eliza mused. the ancient rural excuse for bad behavior. Next, she'll blame the Voting Rights Act for why the pie crusts keep cracking. I felt awful, Talia confessed. Like we all did something wrong. Maybe you did. Eliza didn't say it cruelly. She said it with that slow, unflinching clarity that made you sit up straighter. Melissa has her reasons, sure, but turning someone away because you disagree with them, that's not how I raised you. What was I supposed to do? I need this job. Talia's voice cracked. Your meds are expensive. Rent's up again. I don't get to pick my boss. Eliza squeezed her hand. Don't worry about me. We've gotten through worse. Which was technically true. Eliza had survived segregation, nursing school in the 60s, and 3 recessions. But getting through something doesn't mean you stop being angry it happened. Melissa's breakdown earlier hadn't gone unnoticed. She's scared, Talia said. Business has been slow. She said if things don't pick up, she might have to cut hours. That'd be hard on everyone. Eliza nodded, eyeing the growing stack of bills on the side table. What do you think Letitia's gonna do? I don't know. Post about it? Tell people to avoid the place? Maybe, but people surprise you. Eliza tugged her blanket up to her chin. I just hope she doesn't make trouble. Talia raised an eyebrow. You think she would cause trouble? I think Melissa is brittle, and brittle things crack fast. Eliza stared out the window at a streetlight flickering in the dark. Everyone's got a story. Sometimes the kindest people are the ones who've been hurt the worst. Talia wasn't sure who she meant. That was Eliza's magic. Her riddles came with a built-in time delay. You understood them only when it was too late to pretend you hadn't. As she got ready for bed, Talia glanced at her phone. No new posts from Letitia. No boycott hashtags. Just silence. The kind that made you nervous. The kind that meant something bigger was being planned. And as she pulled her blanket over her chest, she kept seeing Letitia's face. That quiet calm. That weight of experience. Melissa had tried to write her off with a line about politics. But Talia knew better. This wasn't about politics. It was about a woman who knew how to turn a locked door into a spotlight. Talia had gone to bed expecting another quiet morning of burnt toast and passive-aggressive tips. What she got instead was a masterclass in small-town hysteria. Her alarm exploded at 5:30 a.m. like it had a personal vendetta. She rolled out of bed with the grace of a sandbag and stumbled into the morning with half a prayer and no caffeine. But no amount of grogginess could have prepared her for what was waiting outside Maple Creek Diner, because apparently forgiveness was the new black and Letitia James had just walked the runway. At first glance, the crowd looked like protesters, which would have been ironic considering the last protest in Oakwood involved a school board debate over whether tofu was Marxist. But this was something different. These weren't angry townsfolk holding pitchforks and anti-woke slogans. No, they were waiting, patient, friendly, some even sipping gas station coffee like it was fine wine. It was unsettling. The last time the diner had this much attention, someone had mistaken a squirrel for a rat and called animal control. Excuse me, Talia said, trying to squeeze through the bodies. I work here. A woman in a red coat smiled like they were old friends. We're waiting for you to open. Is it true Letitia James recommended this place? Talia blinked. What? She did. A man jumped in, posted about it. Said this place had the best meatloaf in the county. Talia didn't know whether to laugh or throw up. She had watched Melissa exile that woman like she was personally responsible for rising property taxes. And now? Now she was the new Yelp queen of Oakwood. Before she could say anything useful or even coherent, a news van screeched to a halt at the curb. Out hopped a man who looked like he moisturized with arrogance. "Perfect timing," he chirped. "Camden Walsh, Channel 8. You work here?" "I do." "Great. We're doing a story on the viral sensation. Quick statement?" "I have to open up," Talia muttered, fumbling with her keys like they were made of soap. "One quote? A sentence?" "I can't be late," she snapped, finally slipping inside and locking the door behind her like the building might get overrun by influencers. Inside, the diner was still dark, humming softly like it hadn't just become the epicenter of accidental reconciliation. Talia switched on the lights, tied her apron, and stared at the floor for a beat too long. Then she checked her phone. 3 missed calls from Melissa. Oh no. The back door flew open like a tax audit. "Talia!" Melissa burst in, looking like a Real Housewives audition gone wrong. Messy ponytail, no makeup, eyes bulging with caffeine and existential dread. "There's a crowd outside," she panted. "Something about Letitia James recommending us online. It's insane." She shoved her phone at Talia like it was evidence in a crime scene. On the screen, a post from Letitia, complete with a flattering photo of the diner's blue awning and cheerful flower boxes. "Was turned away from this little gem in Oakwood last night because the owner didn't agree with my politics. Respect her right to refuse service. But trust me, folks, the meatloaf special smelled amazing, and everyone inside looked happy. Small businesses are the heart of America, even when they don't want my business. If you're in the area, give Maple Creek Diner a try. Support local, always." Talia gawked. "She's sending people to eat here? After I kicked her out," Melissa finished, pale as biscuit dough. "Is this a trick? Is she trying to humiliate me?" "That doesn't sound like a trick," Talia said carefully. "It sounds like—" "Forgiveness?" Melissa barked. "Please, nobody in politics is that nice." Ah, there it was, the sacred doctrine of cynics. If someone acts with grace, it must be a setup. Melissa had spent years defining patriotism as the right to exclude people, and now she was spiraling because someone exercised restraint. Poetic, really. The front door rattled. Camden was back, pointing at his watch like he had somewhere more important to be than the moral theater of rural America. "We're not open for 20 more minutes," Melissa called. "I just want a quick statement about the viral post." "Viral?" Melissa echoed, like it was a slur. "We'd better start cooking," Talia said, back to logistics. After all, a tsunami of redemption was still a tsunami. The grills wouldn't fire themselves. They scrambled. Pancake batter doubled, coffee brewed in buckets. Danny summoned from the void. Talia lit all 4 grills like it was Black Friday brunch, not an impromptu peace summit. At 6:30 a.m. sharp, Melissa unlocked the door. The crowd flooded in. People smiled. People smiled. Camden sat up in the corner, eyes gleaming. "Just one statement," he pleaded, like this was Watergate. "No comment," Melissa said flatly, "unless you're ordering breakfast." And with that, the spin began, because nothing says redemption like scrambled eggs and a side of existential confusion. But Melissa didn't know it yet. The story was no longer hers. She'd tried to control the narrative with a scowl and a refusal. Letitia James had rewritten it, with a plate she never even got to eat. Camden ordered the pancake special like a man who'd mistaken himself for neutral. By 7 a.m., the line was out the door. The coffee was flowing like campaign donations, and Melissa had to call in Hector, her part-time cook and full-time realist, just to keep the griddle from staging a walkout. The kitchen roared with the noise of redemption-flavored breakfast, and each jingle of the doorbell sent Talia's nerves into a fresh tailspin. Half of her expected Letitia to walk back in like nothing happened, drop her coat, and say, "I'll have what Grace gets you." But she didn't, which somehow made it worse. Between orders of biscuits and moral ambiguity, Talia found Melissa at the window, watching the crowd like it might vote her off the island. "We'll run out of food at this rate," she murmured. "I've never seen it this busy. Not even on Christmas morning." "Isn't that good?" Talia asked. Melissa's face contorted into something between confusion and indigestion. "I don't know what this is," she said. "Why would she do this? I humiliated her. I kicked her out of my restaurant. This doesn't make sense." "Maybe she's just being kind." Melissa scoffed, but with less confidence than usual. "Nobody's that kind, especially not in politics." And there it was. Melissa's guiding principle. All kindness must be a covert operation. She didn't trust it unless it came wrapped in a tax rebate and sealed with a party logo. The bell rang again. An elderly couple entered like they'd stepped out of a Norman Rockwell painting. "Is this where that nice Letitia James got turned away?" the woman asked cheerfully. "She said we should come support you anyway. Isn't that something?" Melissa's face flushed the color of uncooked bacon. She nodded, speechless, and led them to a table with the enthusiasm of someone guiding tourists through their own public shame. Talia watched her all morning. Melissa smiled, but her eyes didn't. Her movements were stiff, her voice a few decibels too high, and every time someone uttered Letitia's name, she flinched like it was a subpoena. By lunch, 3 news vans were parked outside, each one documenting the tragicomic transformation of Maple Creek Diner, from hometown eatery to national metaphor. After the rush, Melissa vanished into her office like a guilty verdict into chambers. When Talia brought her a coffee 10 minutes later, she found her boss hunched at the desk, crying silently, shoulders shaking, napkin clutched like a moral lifeline. "I don't understand," Melissa whispered. "Why didn't she fight back?" Talia didn't have an answer. Frankly, the silence was the fight. She placed the cup down gently. "Maybe she's just a nice person," she said. Melissa wiped her eyes. "Nobody's that nice, especially not in politics." She took a deep breath, stood up, and straightened her shirt like it was a shield. "We should get back out there. Dinner crowd's coming." And come they did. The diner didn't close early once that week. Melissa called suppliers twice to restock, hired 2 new waitresses and another cook. The register overflowed like moral confusion at a town hall. She had to run deposits midday, slipping out the back door like a politician dodging constituents. By Friday, the story had metastasized. Talia overheard a man in a work uniform whispering, "It's gotta be a trick. She's making Melissa look bad. These people? They're just waiting for her to mess up." His friend shook his head. "Nah, my cousin knows her assistant. Says she's decent. Maybe she meant it. Supporting local business and all." "Please, politicians don't do nice things without a reason." "Ah, yes, the universal rule of cynics. If it's generous, it must be strategic. If it's humble, it must be staged. And if it comes from a black woman who dares to forgive, well, clearly she's plotting something sinister, like social cohesion." During her break, Talia checked her phone. The headlines were everywhere. Letitia James responds to restaurant rejection with kindness. Another. Political divide. Diner turns away. Letitia James ends up on national stage. And then the pictures. So many pictures. Of the diner, of the post, of the crowd. Suddenly, their sleepy town had become the unwilling mascot for America's cultural Cold War, with a meatloaf special as the front line. She went home exhausted. Eliza was watching the news naturally. Camden Walsh stood outside the diner, posing like a man auditioning for gravitas. The owner, Melissa Hargrove, has declined to comment on why she refused service to Letitia James, he intoned, but sources say her rejection was rooted in personal beliefs. Political views, Talia muttered, snatching the remote. Click. Hey, I was watching that, Eliza protested. It's garbage, Talia snapped. They don't know her. They don't know why she did what she did. Eliza studied her face. You look tired. I am tired, Talia groaned, sinking into the couch. The diner's been full every day. My feet hate me. But Melissa? Melissa looks worse. She barely sleeps. She flinches every time the door opens, like she thinks Letitia's coming back. Is she sorry? I don't know. She's confused. We all are. Talia looked at her grandmother. What would you have done if someone you strongly disagreed with came into your business? Eliza was quiet. Then, when I was young, your grandfather and I ran a small grocery store. And just like that, the next chapter began, because what Eliza was about to say wouldn't just explain the past, it would resurrect it. Times had changed, Eliza said, but not always for the better. Back then, people tried to shame you for serving the wrong color. Now, apparently, the shame came from serving the wrong voter registration. Talia listened in silence, her grandmother's voice steady with the weight of 1,000 quiet battles. We didn't serve everyone because we liked everyone, Eliza said, but because judgment belongs to character, not politics. In other words, if you're running a diner, serve eggs, not ego. But for Melissa Hargrove, that lesson had been deep-fried in resentment and served cold with a side of selective outrage. Talia had no argument, just the silent realization that Maple Creek's moral compass was spinning like a politician in a primary debate. That night, Letitia James made no new post, no viral clapback, no passive-aggressive parable. Just silence, which, of course, only made Melissa more nervous. The next morning, Talia arrived early again, stepping into fog thick enough to hide history, or at least delay it. She found Melissa already at the grill, her expression tight, her circles darker than her coffee. "You're early," Talia said. "Couldn't sleep." Melissa flipped pancakes with the intensity of someone hiding behind breakfast. "The bank called. They want to meet. That loan I applied for last month? Suddenly, I'm a good risk." She laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that had lost its alibi. 1 week of business, and suddenly they think I'm Gordon Ramsay. Isn't that something? "Isn't that good?" Talia asked. Melissa froze mid-flip. "Is it? I kicked a black woman out of my restaurant for being too political, and she sent me more customers than I've had in 3 years. She looked up, eyes rimmed red. "What does that make me?" Talia opened her mouth, then shut it. There wasn't a Hallmark card for beneficiary of your own prejudice. Before she could think of something that didn't sound like a TED Talk, they were interrupted by banging from the front door. The breakfast mob was back, ravenous for bacon and redemption. "We'll talk later," Melissa muttered, turning to the grill like it could shield her from accountability. "After lunch, I need to make a decision." "What kind of decision?" Talia asked. Melissa didn't answer, but her silence was louder than a sermon. A week after Letitia's post, Maple Creek Diner was still the hottest ticket in town, and not because of the specials. The line had shortened, but business was booming. Melissa had to print new menus with higher prices just to keep up. Apparently, scandal was good for margins. She was now the reluctant poster child for economic stimulus via public embarrassment. As Talia arrived that morning, the mailman greeted her with a knowing smile. "Big stack for Melissa today," he said. "Guess being infamous makes you popular again." Talia smiled politely and took the bundle. Most of it was the usual: bills, supplier invoices, and a flood of opinion mail stuffed with enough sanctimony to burn a hole through the counter. Some letters praised Melissa for taking a stand. Others used vocabulary that required earmuffs. Melissa had stopped opening them after day 3, which, in fairness, was around the time someone compared her to Jim Crow in an apron. But one envelope stood out. Cream-colored, thick, no return address, just Melissa's name and the diner's. The handwriting was neat and slanted, like someone who'd grown up writing thank-you notes instead of tweets. Talia hesitated, then set it aside. It didn't belong with the noise. By 11, the crowd had thinned, the lull between omelets and burgers. Talia remembered the envelope and handed it over. "Something different came today. I thought you might want to see it." "If it's another letter calling me the moral downfall of America, I'll pass," Melissa grunted. "I don't think it is. The handwriting seems personal." Melissa rolled her eyes, took the envelope, and ran a finger along the seal. "Fine, I'll look at it later." But she didn't toss it in the shame pile. She slipped it into her pocket, like it was burning a hole in her conscience. Talia didn't see the envelope again until closing. She was wiping tables when she spotted Melissa alone in a corner booth, the letter open in front of her, face motionless. One hand was over her mouth. The other gripped the paper like it was the last page of a confession. Talia kept cleaning. You don't interrupt a woman reading her own reckoning. Eventually, she approached. "Everything okay?" Melissa blinked like someone waking up mid-nightmare. "What? Oh, yes, no, I don't know." She folded the letter carefully, reverently. "It's from her. From Letitia James Talia stopped wiping." Of course it was. And what came next would turn a plate of pancakes into something dangerously close to a mirror. It wasn't just the content of the letter that disarmed them. It was the audacity of its grace. Melissa had expected smugness, a political flex, maybe a veiled threat disguised as reconciliation. What she got instead was something infinitely more dangerous in the age of viral vindictiveness: humility. It was the rhetorical equivalent of setting down a sword and offering a slice of pie. "Dear Ms. Hargrove," she read, standing before her staff in a blue dress that looked like it hadn't been worn since her last apology to herself. "Thank you for your honesty." Honesty? That was generous. Most people would have called it a public tantrum with a side of small-town xenophobia. But Letitia's letter, composed in neat cursive, not all caps rage, dissected the moment with surgical compassion. "My grandmother taught me that when someone rejects you, the best response is kindness." And just like that, every eye in the diner turned to Melissa, not with blame, but with expectation. Because when someone quotes their grandmother, you know the conversation's about to get ancestral. And Letitia? She wasn't just bringing back the fried chicken and sweet tea. She was resurrecting an entire moral code. She wrote of dignity, of disagreement without dehumanization, of how the scent of real food and the laughter of waitresses mattered more than campaign signs or media spin. "I didn't recommend your diner to embarrass you," she wrote. "I recommended it because it felt like a place worth saving." The line hit like a sermon wrapped in mashed potatoes. Melissa's voice trembled as she finished the letter, and for a moment, the diner was quieter than it had ever been. Even the ghost of old Mr. Jenkins stopped rattling his cup. And then, as if the universe had no tolerance for epiphanies without plumbing disasters, a pipe burst in the kitchen with the dramatic timing of a Greek tragedy. The floor flooded, the staff scattered, and Melissa never got to say what her decision was. Divine intervention or a leaky metaphor, either way, the moment was gone. Later that night, drenched and defeated, Talia sank into the couch next to Eliza, who handed her popcorn without a word. "You look like you swam home," Eliza said, as if waterlogged revelation were a Tuesday tradition. "Flood at the diner," Talia muttered, pulling off her shoes. But what lingered wasn't the mop water or the broken valve. It was the letter, and as Talia recounted it, Letitia's restraint, her hope, her refusal to humiliate someone who'd humiliated her, Eliza's face shifted. Not with surprise, but with something far older. Recognition. Her fingers tightened around the popcorn bowl. Her eyes narrowed like they were scanning memories in black and white. "What?" Talia asked. "Do you know something?" Eliza didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned back slowly, staring past the TV screen and through several decades. Because when someone responds to rejection with grace, real, earned ancestral grace, you don't just feel it. The air was thick with that kind of silence only found in small towns before sunrise, the kind that carries weight, not peace. Talia walked briskly through Maple Creek's sleeping streets, the cold biting at her cheeks, her thoughts racing faster than her feet. Inside her jacket, she clutched the truth like a secret weapon. Her grandmother had known Mama, Letitia James's grandmother, back when dignity didn't come with hashtags and kindness wasn't content. And now, decades later, fate had folded that forgotten friendship into a diner booth scandal, a viral post, and a letter that felt more like scripture than politics. When she arrived, the lights inside were already on. Through the window, Talia saw Melissa sitting at the counter, alone, hunched over a coffee mug like it was the last thing holding her together. Gone was the woman who once wielded control like a ladle. In her place sat someone humbled, almost hesitant, like she'd wandered into her own reputation and didn't know how to get out. "Talia," Melissa said, her voice low but clear. "Thanks for coming." "You sounded different." "I am," Melissa replied. "At least, I think I'm trying to be." Talia hung up her coat, tied her apron, and slid onto the stool next to her. The diner felt strange when empty. Too clean, too quiet, like the scene of a crime before the chalk outlines are drawn. Melissa pushed the mug toward her. "I've been thinking all night about the letter, about what I almost said before the pipe burst. I need your help." "Help with what?" "I want to invite her back," Melissa said. "Letitia. I want to ask her to dinner. Here, after hours. Just me, her, and maybe your grandmother." Talia blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead serious," Melissa said, "and probably out of my mind." But she wasn't. She was finally acting like someone who realized that being publicly wrong required more than private guilt. It required action. And this wasn't just about making peace. This was about putting her pride on the grill next to the pork chops. Talia nodded slowly. She might say no. "I know," Melissa said, "but I have to try, especially after what I found out." Talia took a breath. "About my grandmother?" Melissa looked surprised, then nodded. "She told me. Eliza and Mama. That's unbelievable." "It's more than that," Talia said. "It explains everything. That line in the letter, responding to rejection with kindness, that's not just some political flourish. That's something Mama actually said. Repeatedly. My grandma told me Beverly used to live by those words. She wasn't being nice for the cameras. She was being Beverly's granddaughter." Melissa exhaled, a slow, heavy breath that carried the weight of 100 misjudgments. "I didn't just insult Letitia. I insulted everything that woman came from." Talia didn't argue. "So," Melissa said, pulling out a clean notepad, "we write an invitation. Not an email, not a text. A real, old-fashioned, handwritten letter." "You want me to help you write it?" Melissa nodded. "You know her better than I do, and your grandmother. She'll help too, right?" Talia hesitated. "You'll have to ask her yourself. But I think, yes, she would." They began drafting the letter together, scratching out lines that sounded too rehearsed, too apologetic, too political. This wasn't about policy. It was about decency, about closing a circle that had opened in Kentucky through the hearts of two little girls on a dusty porch and somehow looped back to a diner in Oakwood. And as Talia looked at Melissa's trembling hands, ink smudging the bottom of the page, she realized something unexpected. This wasn't a story about a scandal anymore. It was becoming a story about courage. The kind that shows up not when you're right, but when you finally admit you weren't. But under the clatter of silverware and the hiss of pancake batter hitting the griddle, something had shifted. Something subtle, but seismic. Melissa no longer moved like a woman building walls. She moved like someone cautiously unlocking a door. As the day kicked off with its usual rhythm, Talia kept glancing at the envelope lying on the prep counter like a tiny bomb made of grace and consequences. It was strange how a simple note, written in blue ink on cream paper, could carry more weight than any headline Camden Walsh had broadcast all week. And speaking of Camden, the man himself strutted through the front door right around 9:30, looking like a peacock in search of his next spotlight. "Morning, ladies," he said with that smirk reporters wear when they smell the next scoop baking. Talia intercepted him before he got too far. "We need a favor, and you need to promise, really promise. It's off the record." Camden raised an eyebrow, clearly delighted by the prospect of secrets. "I'm listening." Talia handed him the sealed envelope. "It's for J.D. Vance. Personal. No cameras, no quotes, no headlines." He weighed the envelope in his hand like it might start whispering gossip. What is it? Apology? Bribe? Love letter? "Just kindness," Talia said, sharper than she meant to. Camden blinked, then, shockingly, nodded. "I'll deliver it. No story. Scout's honor." "Were you even a scout?" "No, but I report on them," he said, grinning. "Close enough." He tucked the envelope inside his blazer, gave a two-finger salute, and disappeared just as quickly as he'd come in. Melissa stared after him like she'd just handed a Fabergé egg to a man juggling chainsaws. But she didn't stop him. Maybe that was the first step, trusting the world not to humiliate her for trying to do better. The rest of the day moved fast, filled with customers, deliveries, and an undercurrent of anticipation that hummed beneath the diner's usual noise. By mid-afternoon, Camden texted Talia a single sentence. "Delivered personally." He read it on the spot. That was all they needed to hear. No cameras, no controversy, just quiet confirmation. It wasn't until 2 days later, while Melissa was slicing lemons in the back, that her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She stared at it for a long moment before answering. Ms. Hargrove, this is J.D. Vance. Melissa froze, the knife still in her hand. I received your letter. Thank you. A pause. I'd be honored to join you Friday. 7 works perfectly. And the connection to my grandmother, it means a great deal. Melissa swallowed. Would you like to bring anything? I'll bring dessert, J.D. said simply, and a very open mind. Melissa hung up, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't cry this time. She didn't smile either. She just stood still for a beat, then stepped into the kitchen and called out to Talia. He's coming, she said. Talia looked up from the register. He said yes? He's bringing pie, Melissa replied. And in Maple Creek, that counted as a full diplomatic treaty. Now all that was left was to prepare, not for a guest, but for a reckoning done over dinner plates and photographs, where forgiveness wasn't televised and humility tasted like home cooking. And therein lay the absurdity of American redemption, turning a meatloaf dinner into a moral referendum. Melissa, who once wielded political contempt like a chef's knife, now sifted flour like it was holy ash, nervously resurrecting the legacy of a woman she'd never met but had somehow insulted by proxy. The kitchen wasn't just hot, it was metaphorical. There, amidst bowls of whipped potatoes and string beans bathing in bacon fat, Melissa Hargrove wasn't preparing a meal. She was preparing a reckoning. At 4:30, Talia checked her phone for the 5th time, then called Hector to confirm Eliza's pickup. She's ready, he texted. Wearing that blue dress like she's heading to prom. You owe me a slice of pie. Talia smiled, then turned back to the kitchen where Melissa was nervously adjusting the placement of napkins like they were diplomatic scrolls. The clock ticked louder than usual. At 5:45, the last of the regulars were ushered out. At 6 o'clock, the blinds came down. At 6:30, Eliza stepped through the front door, arm in arm with Hector, looking every bit like the matriarch of a political dynasty she never asked for. And then, at 6:57 sharp, the knock. Melissa froze, smoothing her apron once, then again. Talia moved to the side, heart thudding. Eliza stood, spine straight, hands clasped like she was stepping into a courtroom instead of a diner. Melissa opened the door. There stood Letitia James. No entourage, no press. Just her and a peach cobbler box from a bakery downtown. Ms. Hargrove, she said, extending her hand. Thank you for the invitation. Melissa shook her hand with a firmness that betrayed her trembling voice. Please, call me Melissa, and thank you for coming, especially after— Water under the bridge, Letitia said, breezing past the awkwardness like a pro. I didn't bring a lawyer, so that's a good start. Talia stifled a laugh. Eliza chuckled audibly. Ms. Reynolds, Letitia said, stepping toward Eliza. You must be the famous friend of Mama. I'm Eliza, she said, voice catching, and you looked just like her when she was about to call someone a fool to their face. That broke the tension. Letitia laughed, a full, genuine laugh. I'll take that as a compliment. The four sat. The food came out. The first bites were slow, silent, reverent. Then, Eliza opened the photo album and pointed to a sun-faded porch from the 1950s. That's us, she said. We didn't have much, but we had fire. Letitia leaned in. Mama always said she grew up with someone who could out-stubborn her. I never thought I'd meet her. As Eliza told stories of coal dust, schoolyard fights, and borrowed church dresses, Melissa stayed quiet, her eyes fixed on the flicker of shared memory unfolding across the table. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. Miss James, Letitia, I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Letitia nodded slowly, then set down her fork. "Melissa, I've been called worse by people who still shook my hand on camera. You were honest. Wrong, but honest. And when someone's willing to admit they were wrong in front of their own staff, in their own restaurant, that's a bigger gesture than 1,000 social media apologies." The conversation flowed, unhurried, real. No declarations of unity, no declarations of anything, really. Just talk about family, struggle, hope. Letitia told them about her childhood, about the stubbornness she inherited from Mama, and the price of that inheritance in a world that still judges more than it listens. By the time dessert came out, the mood had softened into something unnameable, something intimate and public at once. Letitia poured herself coffee, took a bite of her cobbler, and said, "I didn't come here for reconciliation. I came because sometimes the people we turn away are the ones holding the rope." And as silence settled again, warm and weighty, it was clear to everyone that this wasn't just dinner anymore. It was the beginning of something else. And just like that, what began as a political scandal disguised as a lunch order had quietly transformed into a living archive of American memory, one that didn't scream across cable news banners or end in a viral rant, but rather unfolded at a sticky diner table with creased photo pages and the scent of apple pie in the air. From the kitchen, Melissa peeked through the pass window and caught sight of J.D. leaning in, elbows on the table like a boy at story time, eyes wide as Eliza pointed to a photograph of a 4th of July picnic that had long outlasted every politician in it. It was the kind of intergenerational communion that made performative outrage look like a clown act in a church. Talia wiped her hands on her apron and whispered, "Think he knows he just stepped into a time machine?" Melissa didn't answer right away. She was too busy watching the way JDS's smile folded when Eliza mimicked Beverly's accent, down to the rolling Kentucky lilt and the raised brow that said, "Don't try me." "He knows," Melissa said at last, "and I think it's wrecking him in all the best ways." They plated the food quietly, not out of nerves, but respect. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans with bacon, and fresh-baked rolls, every dish selected not for show, but for history. Melissa didn't want to impress him. She wanted to be honest. That was new. When they returned to the table, Eliza was holding up the silver pin Beverly had given her. She wore this every Sunday after church, even when it didn't match. Said it made her feel like royalty. J.D. laughed. "She wore it to my high school graduation. I remember thinking it looked out of place. Guess it never was." Melissa set down the plates gently. "Dinner is served." J.D. turned to her and said, "Thank you, Melissa. Not just for dinner, for all of this." "I should have served you meatloaf the first time," she said, half joking. "Would have saved us all a lot of trouble." He grinned. "Maybe, but then we wouldn't be here, would we?" They ate. They didn't talk about cable news or Twitter mobs. No one mentioned votes or districts. Instead, they discussed cookbooks, the rising cost of eggs, and the town's annual fall festival, which J.D. said he might just come back for. Eliza told stories that meandered like creeks, pulling laughter and reflection from everyone at the table. Talia, ever the observer, realized the most radical thing happening tonight wasn't political at all. It was human. Toward the end of the meal, J.D. turned to Melissa. "Can I tell you something?" She nodded, already bracing for whatever bombshell was about to drop. "I didn't write that post for the internet. I wrote it for my grandmother. I wanted her legacy to mean something in a world that turns everything into noise. I didn't expect it to mean something to you." Melissa swallowed hard. "It did. It does." She glanced at Eliza, who gave her the smallest nod, like a general signaling the charge. "And I want to do something more with it." J.D. raised an eyebrow. "More?" Melissa took a deep breath. "This town needs more than a good meal. It needs somewhere people can talk without yelling, share stories without agenda. So I'm thinking of starting something. Monthly dinners, no press, no platforms, just conversation." "You want to turn the diner into a reconciliation cafe?" he teased. "No," she smirked. "I want to turn it back into what diners were always meant to be. Places where people sat elbow to elbow and remembered they were neighbors, not enemies." Talia blinked. Eliza smiled. And J.D. Vance, who'd walked into this story as a headline and now sat as a grandson, simply said, "Then you'll need more pie." Because redemption, when it's real, doesn't come with a press release. It comes with coffee refills, awkward silences, and someone brave enough to cook dinner anyway. And somewhere between the second helping of mashed potatoes and the final photo on Eliza's lap, everyone at the table understood. This wasn't the end of the story. Under the soft hum of the diner's overhead lights, the final scene settled like the closing note of an old country ballad, gentle but lingering. Talia helped her grandmother into the car, the photo album now in J.D.'s hands. A baton passed not just between generations, but between worlds that rarely touched. Across town, people were likely still arguing online about that diner, spinning headlines into outrage and hashtags into battle flags. But here, within the linoleum and lamplight of Maple Creek, a different kind of politics had taken root, one not staged for cameras, but forged in sincerity. And somewhere deep inside Melissa Hargrove, something finally cracked open. As Talia drove away, she couldn't stop thinking about the look on J.D.'s face as he turned each page of the album, like a man finding scripture in a scrapbook. For all the cable news pundits who sneered at the idea of nuance and mocked forgiveness as weakness, that photo of wild-haired Beverly Vance was louder than 1,000 hot takes. Meanwhile, inside the quiet diner, Melissa leaned forward, hands folded, her voice steady but low. "I need to ask you something," she told J.D. "It's not about politics. It's about purpose." J.D. tilted his head. "Go on." Melissa took a breath. "You said earlier you got into politics to help people who lost everything." "I believe you. I've seen it in the way you talk about your grandmother. But I wonder, do you think you're reaching them? The folks like my dad? Like me?" J.D. didn't respond right away. Instead, he traced the edge of his coffee mug with one finger, the way people do when they're trying to choose the version of truth that causes the least collateral damage. "Sometimes I wonder the same thing," he admitted. "But I keep trying. Because the alternative is giving up, and that's not how I was raised." Melissa nodded slowly. "I've been thinking about hosting something here, once a month. No cameras, just conversation. You said something earlier about neighbors, not enemies. That stuck with me." J.D. looked surprised. "A town hall?" "More like a potluck with opinions," she said, "where people show up hungry, not just for food, but to be heard. I don't know if it'll work, but I want to try." J.D. smiled. "Melissa Hargrove, you might just be the most subversive person I've met in months." "That sounds like a compliment," she smirked. "It is," he replied, standing up and reaching for his coat. "And if you do this, I'll be back, not as a guest, as a neighbor." She watched him walk out into the cool night, pie box tucked under one arm, photo album under the other. No cameras, no entourage, just a man and a memory. And as the bell above the door jingled softly behind him, Melissa whispered to the empty diner, "One pie at a time." Because maybe that's how it starts. Not with a speech or a campaign, but with a shared story, a forgotten photo, and a stubborn waitress who refuses to believe decency is dead. Maybe the revolution isn't televised because it's being served with mashed potatoes on mismatched china in places like Maple Creek. And maybe, just maybe, that's exactly what this country needs right now. Talia looked around the table and saw something she hadn't seen in months. Hope. Real, tangible, break through the clouds hope. Not the kind politicians wave on campaign signs or CEOs promise in ads between pharmaceutical warnings, but the kind that smells like maple-glazed meatloaf and fresh rolls. Even grumpy Mr. Jenkins cracked a smile, though he disguised it with a loud sip of his coffee. Melissa placed the letter flat on the table like it was a Declaration of Independence written in ink and powdered sugar. "I haven't signed anything yet," she added, her voice steady. "I wanted you all to know first because this affects everyone. More hours, new roles, real benefits. And if any of you have concerns, now's the time." A quiet buzz filled the room as staff exchanged glances, half disbelieving, half elated. Danny leaned in. "Melissa, do you realize this makes you the first employer in this county to offer insurance to diner workers?" "Yeah," Melissa said with a dry chuckle. "Me and my socialist meatloaf." Even Hector chuckled, and Talia, stunned by how far they'd come, shook her head. "From county villain to local trailblazer," she said. "That's a pretty wild arc." Melissa smirked. "Just don't call it a redemption story. I'm still not voting for him." "That's fine," Talia replied. "But you can't deny you both believe in second chances. You just proved it, with full-time benefits and 5 new jobs." "6," Melissa corrected her. "I want to hire a prep cook full-time so Hector doesn't have to carry lunch and dinner by himself anymore." Hector's eyes widened slightly, and he nodded in solemn gratitude. Then Danny blurted out what everyone else was thinking. "We're really gonna do this, aren't we?" "Yeah," Melissa said, her tone finally sure. "We're going to build something better than we had, without changing who we are." For a brief second, no one moved. The weight of the moment settled over them like the hush before the first raindrop. Then, Talia stood and clapped her hands once. "Well, what are we waiting for? We've got a whole town to feed, and soon a whole new wing to fill." And just like that, the meeting dissolved into chatter and donut crumbs. People started imagining menus for the new space, arguing over whether booths or tables would fit better, and even Mr. Jenkins suggested adding a jukebox like the old days. But Talia couldn't stop thinking about something Eliza had said, that life was made of circles. And in this particular circle, a rejected cup of coffee had turned into health insurance, a second dining room, and an investment built not on branding or bias, but on faith in decency. As they opened the diner doors to the first wave of regulars, unaware of what had just been set in motion, Melissa touched Talia's arm. "You think people will come once the renovation's done? I mean, after the novelty fades?" Talia smiled. "Melissa, they're not coming for the novelty. They're coming for the story. And now you're writing the next chapter." Melissa exhaled slowly, staring out at Main Street like it was wider than it used to be. "Well then," she said, squaring her shoulders, "let's give them something worth reading." She now wore a navy button-up with a name tag that read, Talia Reynolds, General Manager, a promotion Melissa insisted on the moment they signed the investment paperwork. At first, Talia had protested. Too young, too new, too busy with community college. But Melissa had waved her off. "You're the backbone of this place," she'd said. "It's time everyone sees it." And they did. Customers now asked for her by name. Suppliers called her first, and when a new hire spilled an entire tray of root beer floats, it was Talia who calmed them down and mopped the floor with one hand while jotting down inventory notes with the other. Eliza still came in once a week, usually for Thursday meatloaf, always sitting by the front window where the sun caught the silver pin on her collar. She and Melissa had grown closer, too, trading stories over coffee, sometimes even arguing, gently, about pie crusts and local politics. "I still wouldn't vote for the man," Eliza would say with a smirk, "but I'll be damned if he hasn't done something good." J.D. Vance, for his part, kept his distance. True to his word, he took no role in the business, no credit, no interviews, but every few weeks a handwritten letter would arrive addressed to Melissa and team, often including a quote from his grandmother or a newspaper clipping about another diner that had turned things around. And one day in June, a package arrived. An old wooden sign with faded lettering, clearly sanded and restored. It read, "No strangers, just future regulars." Melissa hung it above the entrance the next morning. "It used to hang in my dad's first restaurant," she explained to the team. "He believed in second chances, even if he didn't say it that way." The message was clear. Mistakes had been made, yes. But the door stayed open, always. The diner had become more than a restaurant. It was a story, a second-chance story told not in speeches but in quiet decisions, in meals served without judgment, in insurance forms filed and resumes reviewed. Local schools invited Melissa and Talia to speak about small business resilience. A journalist from a national magazine showed up, quietly, respectfully, and asked if she could write a feature called "The Diner That Refused and Redeemed." Melissa declined the interview, but gave her a cup of coffee and a slice of Betty's pie. "If you want to write about us," she said, "write about the people who kept showing up, even when it was hard. Write about the girl who convinced her boss to listen. Write about a grandmother who remembered." As summer bloomed, tourists began wandering in, curious, hungry, unaware of the story until they saw the framed letter from J.D. Vance on the wall. Some rolled their eyes, others asked for a booth near the window, and a few, just a few, walked out. But most stayed, and most returned. Because even in a divided America, even in a town like Maple Creek, kindness had done something that politics couldn't. It had built a business. It had connected generations. And in a quiet booth by the window, next to a vase of fresh daisies and a copy of the Hillbilly Elegy tucked beside the menu, it reminded people that being right isn't always as important as being decent. It was that he had stayed, quietly, consistently, without fanfare, in an age where most people chased clicks and outrage, where politicians appeared only when the cameras rolled and vanished when the work began. J.D. Vance had done the unthinkable. He had returned, month after month, not to boast, not to convert, but simply to show up. He paid for his meals, tipped generously, chatted with locals, and helped revitalize a town not with slogans, but with strategy. No interviews, no press releases, just presence. That, Talia realized, was the true subversion, replacing performance politics with personal accountability. And in doing so, he had transformed the narrative of Maple Creek from a story of ideological rejection into a quiet case study of earned trust. Outside, the summer sun gleamed off the fresh paint of the new storefronts, Kids biked past the diner, waving to Eliza through the window. A mural had recently gone up across from the post office, a depiction of the old Maple Creek with the words, "Built on grit, grown with grace." At its corner, someone had painted the silhouette of a woman holding a coffee pot and an apron. No label, no name, but everyone knew it was Melissa, and beside her, painted in smaller scale but with unmistakable care, sat two girls on a porch step, one with wild curly hair, the other with solemn eyes, capturing a friendship that had outlived time, and now, through their grandchildren, had come full circle. Talia rose from the table and hugged Eliza tightly, then turned toward the counter where a new waitress was fumbling with the register. "First week," Melissa whispered to her with a smile. "Remember how you were on your first week?" "Worse?" Talia grinned. "But someone gave me a chance." She walked over, steadying the young woman's hands and whispering the trick for fixing a jammed receipt roll. The girl nodded gratefully, her cheeks flushed. And just like that, the cycle continued. One small moment becoming a future turning point in someone else's story. Because that was the real legacy of the diner. Not just a second chance for Melissa, or a gesture of forgiveness from JD, or even an economic revival. It was the proof that decency could still lead, even in divided times. That sincerity still mattered. That political lines didn't have to redraw the boundaries of basic humanity. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows and the smell of coffee mingled with buttered toast, the bell above the door jingled again. A young couple stepped in, holding hands, scanning the room nervously. "First time here?" Talia asked with a smile. The man nodded. "We heard this place used to turn people away for their politics, but now it's, different?" Talia leaned forward, placed two menus gently on the table, and said with quiet confidence, "Now we serve everyone." The most shocking thing wasn't the investment or the apology, it was the bridge he built. Quiet, steady, human. In a town split by fear and pride, one act of kindness rewrote the story. And maybe, just maybe, that's how change begins. Not with noise, but with someone staying, listening, and proving that even in division, dignity still has a seat at the table.